Hi class, for this lecture we are going to talk about personality. So, like other things we have talked about, like intelligence and consciousness, personality is kind of one of those elusive things, but it's one of those very distinct things that make us individual. And basically our personalities, they're those unique ways that we feel, think, and act. And it's a little bit different from things like character and temperament and say things like emotions and emotional intelligence. But our personalities are a mix of all of those aspects too. And then, as always, I've got a great video there on personality if you want to go and watch that. Alright, so in this part of the lecture, we're going to look at Freud and Jung, and then in the second part we're going to look at the humanists Maslow and Carl Rogers. So basically when it comes to Freud, the most important thing or his most important contribution to psychology would be his ideas on the mind and how the mind is structured and how it's those three different parts. We talked about with consciousness, I do believe. So we have our conscious mind, we have our subconscious mind, and then we have our unconscious mind. So Freud thought that pretty much all our behaviors was down in our unconscious mind. That's where we stored everything, and it wasn't just those negative life experiences that were repressing down in our unconscious. It's pretty much all our experiences and everything that makes up our behaviors we have in our unconscious. So, when it comes to personality, Freud gave us this idea of, the part of our mind that is personality is the psyche. That's actually what psyche means. It means personality. And so, just like Freud broke the mind up into three parts, he also saw our psyche as having three components there. And those are the id, the ego, and the superego. And these are all, structures of our personality that develop as we go through life. So we'll see with us Freud's psychosexual stages of development. He's got 5 of those, and we'll know where each of those components start emerging. And just like those ideas of the conscious mind, the subconscious, and the unconscious, these aren't like physical parts of the brain. It's not like we're going in and you dissect the brain and you can find the hippocampus or the amygdala or the thalamus, right? These are more concepts about how the brain works. Alright, so Freud believed that development took place in 5 stages, and pretty much when we're looking at development, we have this idea that it either occurs in chronological stages, or it's something that's kind of a little bit more transitory there. So for Freud, he defined development as these fixed stages, and basically it had to do with libido, and where your libido was fixated at indicated what stage of development you were in. And so for Freud, the majority of our development takes place in our childhood, okay? And so this idea of libido, we talk about it a lot as being kind of this sexual energy. It's pretty much translated as like this sexual drive or instincts. And so as we grow physically, we kind of focus on different parts of our body. And so for Freud, he thought that could be a source of pleasure, or that could be a source of frustration. And so, Freud pretty much believed that life, it's kind of this utilitarian idea that life is kind of a series of pleasure and pain, where we're, of course, trying to get away from that pain and move towards pleasure. And it comes down to these 2 concepts that he calls the eros and the thanatos. Basically, those are our most primitive drives that we have, and they are the sex drive and the aggression drive. So eros is the sex drive, thanatos is the aggression drive. We can also call those the life drives and the death drives. So we see how at our very core, those are kind of those basic primal instincts that all species have, basically, so that we can survive. So for Freud, he thought that society comes in and it makes us kind of conform in certain ways that maybe go against our innate nature. Now, that didn't mean that he thought that we all wanted to run around and kind of mate and kill each other. It's not like that. What he means with these ideas of libido and maybe the fact that people might develop unhealthy libidos, it's more about that idea of just that when we have abnormal behaviors, it's going to manifest itself along those arrows and thanatos. If you think about when we talked about dreams, it's kind of the same way with that. It's like we have these really intense dreams because it's our mind, our brain's way of telling us something. So I think that's what Freud talks about when he talks kind of, all this kind of sexual stuff, that it's just that. It's that, in order for our brains and our body to tell us something is wrong, we have to have these really kind of profound and shocking images, or else, I think we're just not going to pay attention to it. And, what's the most disturbing way that our brain can get our attention? By perverting sex and perverting things like, our aggression drive there. It's kind of bases of most horror and like psychological thrillers there too. All right. Alright, so when it comes to Freud and his stages of development, he did think that in our infancy and our toddler years, those were the most crucial stages for the formation of our personality. So it's pretty much like he thought that it was during those years that our personalities did form, and then pretty much we're just kind of regulating it from there on out. Alright, so and let's look at the id, the ego, and the super ego there. So the id is basically down in our unconscious, and it works on the pleasure drive. Sorry, my dog's playing with this toy there. I'll try to get it away from him. Works on the pleasure drive. Maxie! And so it works on the pleasure drive. So the ego is all about self-fulfillment, and it's really the one that's all about me and just wants to do what feels good and is right to me. And we could see in those first 5 years of development, we are very kind of id-centric or egocentric, really, because we do view life only from our eyes and our perspectives. We haven't even formulated the idea that other people have their own minds and ideas. We really do think the world is all about us, and it's all about satisfying our needs and our demands. And so what we see then is when those needs and those demands aren't fulfilled, that's when conflict comes into play there. So our ego, pretty much ego is I. That is your self that lives in society. The ego works on the reality principle. So it's the one that's, always out here in conscious awareness navigating the world. Our super ego is kind of our moral compass. It is that conscious, as in conscience, that we have. If you think of Pinocchio, the little Jiminy Cricket in Pinocchio, let your conscience be your guide, that represented the super ego. If you think about the Cat in the Hat, you could see these Freudian elements in it too. So the super ego would be the fish, because the fish is always trying to get the kids to do the right thing and to make sure they listen to their mother. And then what happens then? The cat comes in and he's all like, no, let's play, let's have a good time, don't worry about any of that, right? So he represents the id in that story. And then the ego in that story are the little kids, right? Because they're the ones that are in reality. They're the ones that have to make the choice of having fun with the Cat in the Hat or listening to the fish, listening to their conscious there, right? And then I would say, just to bring this in, thing one and thing two, those would kind of be the eros and the thanatos there, because what do? They just come in and just create all sorts of chaos and havoc, right? All right, so like I said, so when these things are out of whack, that's where we see conflict come up, and then if that conflict is not resolved, that then results in kind of unhealthy development in adulthood and kind of abnormal personalities and personality disorders. So in order to overcome that conflict, it depends on where our libido is concentrated in the body, and then of course, the stage associated with that. All right, so pretty much what I'm saying here is so that for Freud, before you could move on to the next stage of development, you had to overcome some type of conflict, and that conflict is going to be related to that energy, that libido you have, and that's really not so much that sexual energy, even though really for Freud he did focus a lot on that. That's one of the major conflicts of him, but try to separate that and just think of it more of just that life energy, just that will to kind of survive that we have inside of us. And yes, sex is part of that. I mean, procreation is the main way that we do survive. But Freud was really looking at individual development, whereas we know with some of these other psychologists in development, they were kind of looking at more social context. For Freud, it really was focused on the individual, and it was about kind of what the individual wants and needs. And a big part of that is just how do we focus our energy on what we want and need. And so, when we do that at young age, when we can't do that at young ages, and we don't have those needs met, and like I said, it's hard for us then to have become healthy adults and kind of, just like I have there, kind of mature. All right, so basically Freud thought that if we weren't able to adequately satisfy those needs and move on to the next stage, we could see three things happening here. We can have frustration, overindulgence, or fixation. All right, so what we see is what we see is frustration, is that if the needs of the individual have not been met at that particular stage, then that person tends to be a very frustrated person in adulthood. And then at the same time, Freud thought that, we overcome conflict. It wasn't just about like negative things. It wasn't about needs not being met. There's another side of that. It's either, he went to the extremes there. It was either you don't have your needs met, and so you develop an abnormal personality, or you're so spoiled and pampered in your needs getting met that you develop some type of a psychological disorder there too. So it's about that balance of needs in life, so that you can have healthy development there. So what we see when those needs aren't met, we see frustration, we see overindulgence when, like I said, when those needs are too well satisfied, when people are just, when children that are spoiled rotten and spoiled brats would kind of be like overindulgence. All right, and then what also can happen here is that if you do not have those needs met, you're overindulging in your needs, and you reach that frustration or overindulgence, you can get stuck in that, and so that's when a fixation would occur. And basically what that means is then that your energy, your libido is stuck in that stage, as Freud would say, it was permanently invested. And he also thought that in some ways our libido does kind of stay, certain parts of our libido stays in each of these stages of development, and so in many ways, even as adults, we still have characteristics of infancy or early childhood. Alright, so when it comes to his stages of development, like I said, there are 5 of them. And so, in the beginning, we have the id, so in the oral stage there, And this would be when we're first born, and so we're born with our id, and it's all about us. And when you're a newborn baby, that libido is all fixated on survival, right? It's all about feeding. And so that is the oral stage, because we are focused on that act of feeding, that act of the mouth, of suckling, of swallowing. We're kind of naturally, we have those natural instincts that allow us to be able to find the mother's nipple, and then put our mouth in the correct way to start getting that nourishment from it. That's something that pretty much all mammals are born with the ability to do. And so it's about that time, then the ego starts developing, because what happens, we start getting that awareness of the world around us. A kind of conscious starts to develop, right? Conscious awareness, I should say. Then we go to the anal phase, and then we have the phallic phase, and this is when we start to see morality and our consciousness develop. So the super ego then starts developing, and then we have the latent stage, and the genital stage there. So all right, so just like I said, so at the oral stage, this is about our first year of life. So this is newborn babies, and like I said, it's all about the id, satisfying those needs of feeding, basically. So it's oral, it's all focused on the mouth. So Freud said that over oral stimulation, not enough oral stimulation, could lead to an oral fixation later in life. And so things like smoking, nail biting, finger chewing, people who suck their thumbs as adults, he would say that those are all a type of oral fixation. And for the most part, we see those emerge as kind of a reaction to stress, and that's very true kind of with obsessive compulsive personality disorders. They do that particular ritual that they do as it's a reaction to stress. It's a coping mechanism. It's a way to deal with stress. And so so what we see, that's what I want to say. And so, so what we then see, because of that conscious awareness forming, we get that ego starting to form. So we're kind of coming out of that id stage and started coming into the reality principle there. Alright, so now when it gets to about 1 to 3 years, we are in what Freud called the anal stage, and pretty much our libido, it's focused around toilet training is a good way to say that. And for Freud, he thought that as children we get great pleasure from defecating there. And once again, since we see the ego starting developing, and children are not really aware of these external forces, and that they're not totally in control of their world, this is the first time that we really see conflict come up for pretty much everybody in life. Like with the oral stage, that fixation and that frustration in life, that's not something that everybody is going to experience. That depends on the parent, on the mother. Specifically for Freud, it's depend on how nurturing the mother is. But when it comes to the anal stage, this is a conflict we all go through, because we're all potty trained, right? And so this is when we start to get restrictions imposed on us. This is basically saying this is when we start to learn that the world is not all about us, and we can't just run around doing whatever we want, right? And so we see that conflict with authority start to come in, because what happens? That first year of life, those endocrine system there, or excretion systems, those are they're not something that we're aware of, right? Nobody tells you when to go to the bathroom. You just go to the bathroom, get your diaper changed, go on with life, right? Well, now you're being told, no, you can't do that. You now have to learn that you have to hold that, and that there's an appropriate time and place to defecate, right? And so, like I said, so this creates conflict. And so what we see is that when we have potty training that's too early, that's too harsh, maybe too just disciplinary, we have anal retentive personalities. And so these people, they're very obsessively tidy, they're punctual, very respectful of authority. Maybe we could call them OCD. Maybe we could also call them a little bit, it's a OCD, I guess, would be the best one. I was thinking there was another one, but it is escaping me right now. So they're also very stubborn, very like, in a way, kind of selfish with their stuff, you know, and it has to do with that, once again, you know, that pleasure of being able to defecate. And so, you know, they had to wait for their moms to tell them, you know, so that they could perform. And then what happens once they were on the toilet, they performed, then they got praised. So that's where the respect for the authority comes in. And we can see maybe that's why the anal retentive terminology comes in too, because it is kind of about holding on to that and then, you know, letting it go at the appropriate time there. And then once again, we have the other end of the spectrum there. So we have anal expulsive, and these are pretty much would be the kids that they just had a very liberal potty training. So it's like, yeah, go wherever you want, whenever you want. You'll figure out eventually to go to the bathroom. You know, kind of very free spirited type of parenting there. And so what we see with these type of people is that they're very messy, they're very disorganized, they're very rebellious. These are people who literally want to share everything with you. So, you know, literally sharing their stuff there with you. And so we can see how that could lead to problems later in life. And this is the stage, the next one, the phallic stage, and we put that as kind of 3 to about 5 to 6 years old. And this is, like I said, this was the one that was most controversial, because this is where Freud said that little children have sexual feelings and sexual desires like adults, and so people were just like blown away. I mean, it was let's see, Freud came out with this ideas here. It was about the 20s to 40s. It was around the times of World War I, more so World War II there. I think, in fact, he put his first book out right before Hitler got into office. Now I'm losing it, but Freud was around right at that time there, right? So we just got through Victorian England, and so we still have very rigid views in society. You know, nowadays sex is everywhere, right? But you know, at that time it was much different. So this was very revolutionary for Freud to make this type of declaration. Okay. So at the phallic stage, this is when we start getting more aware of our anatomy and our genitals, and so we see that then becomes kind of a new focus for our libido. And so he said, and once again this was controversial, he said, so this is a time when children, they begin to masturbate because, you know, their libido is focused on their genitals, and so that's kind of their ego satisfaction there, right? Because we haven't developed the super ego A yet, so nobody has told them that this is bad, this is something that you can't do, right? And I think it's revolutionary, but then in many ways, if you think about it, what do we call this when we see little boys and girls playing? We call it playing doctor, right? You know, it's kind of a natural thing that we're curious about our bodies and curious about other bodies, okay? So this is about this age we start becoming aware that, you know, little boys and little girls are different, their bodies are different, and so then we see we see conflict coming in a sexual nature. So we see things like erotic attraction, resentment, rivalry, jealousy, and fear. And so what Freud called this was the Oedipus complex, and that was for boys. And then in girls, it's the Electra complex. And so basically, by resolving this Oedipus and Electra complex, that then forms our kind of our sexual identities, our self-identities, and so then we start kind of emulating, adopting the characteristics of the same-sex parents, or pretty much like the parents that we want to be, right? It's kind of a way to say that. Freud thought that homosexuality was an abnormal behavior, and it would be, you know, something to do with someone being fixated at that phallic stage there. But I think, you know, that's just another way to be a human being. There's nothing wrong with that. So to really look at this Oedipus and Electra complex, you know, that idea that we adopt those characteristics of that same-sex parents, it's more about we start finding the characteristics of who we are as individuals. That's I think maybe a more appropriate thing to say there. So all right, so what is this Oedipus and Electra complex there? So basically, Oedipus, that you'll hear it, Oedipus Rex or Oedipus Rex, Oedipus is it's an old Greek story, and it's about this young man. And the story goes, you know, king has a typical Greek tragedy here. King has a son, goes to the soothsayer, the fortune teller, finds out that when he gets older, son's going to kill him, take over the throne. Dad, king, doesn't want that, so he pretty much has wants to have the baby killed. Baby miraculously survives, unbeknownst to him. He ends up, a young man, ends up killing the king, and then marries the queen, who just happens to be his mother. I think in the story they go back to the soothsayers, how they figure out that he is indeed the son, but, ends up finding out that he is married to his mother, gets so distraught by that pokes his eyes out, becomes blind. I think the mother might kill herself in the story. And so so basically the story is it's that idea that the boy slept with his mother. So when we see the conflict at the phallic stage, for its explanation for everything. What's wrong with you? You want to sleep with your mother and you're not allowed to, right? And so that's what we see here. Even though in the story they didn't know they were related, it's once again it's shame comes in, because now that you know that's incest, that's wrong, so then you feel guilty, you feel shame. So what's that? We see that super ego starting to develop, the idea of consciousness, right? Morality kind of starts to form here about 5-6 years old. Okay, so basically Freud thought that little boys, they did have these sexual feelings to their mother. They do want to possess their mothers exclusively. They don't want the dad around. And so, the boy thinks that, if the father finds out that, this love he has for his mother, that he's going to take that away. And it really comes down for Freud, it was the thing that what the boy was afraid of his father taking away was the thing that men love most, and that would be the penis. And so what we see is boys develop what we call castration anxiety, because they're afraid their father's going to take their penis. And so the way they resolve that conflict is that they then start taking on those masculine traits. It's what we call identification, right? So they start adopting those kind of male gender roles, so that then they're able to kind of go out and find their own female kind of later in life, their own mate, let's put it that way, later in life there. And so for girls, Freud really didn't talk as much about girls in these stages of development as he focuses on males. And I think a lot of that was because A, he was a male, B, he had some strange feelings and desires for his own mother that kind of influenced some of his thinkings. And thirdly, he did do a lot of cocaine. I mean, in many ways that was an acceptable in their time period, but we think that maybe he did tend to abuse it too. And so my point is that he doesn't really talk a lot about girls. It's really this little here at the phallic stage with the Electra complex and this idea of penis envy. is really the only time we hear girls mentioned at all. And so basically what happens with girls is that we see that same thing. You know, we want our dads, we want to possess our dads, we think our mom's keeping him away from us, and basically what we think is that our mom doesn't want our dad to love us as much as he loves the one thing that, you know, we're trying to get our dads to love us as much as men love their penises. It's really hard to talk about this without laughing, right, guys? But I mean, you know, this is all what Freud said. And so basically what happens, we think that our mother took it away from us. So, you know, little boy's afraid dad's going to take it away. We think that our mother took it away. And so we get this penis envy. And basically then, you know, that's when we start developing kind of these negative feelings towards our mothers. And so in order to resolve that conflict, this is where repression comes in. And we have to remember with Freud and his defense mechanisms, they're not all negative things. In fact, those defense mechanisms are to protect us from kind of those negative things that go on, you know, that go on in kind of our head, right? And so basically, to get over our penis envy, we repress those feelings, and then we start taking on that identification of those more female gender roles there. All right, and so I find this very interesting because from then the latency stage, about 5 to 6 to puberty, let me say puberty, okay, so basically, preteens, prepubescence to, I mean, he says puberty, but basically he's talking about to like adolescence, right? He believed that our libido becomes latent. So we have no libido, it's dormant, we have no sexual energy because it's all being directed towards socialization, tasks of friendship, tasks of schools, and you know, work. Of course we go and work because during Freud's time, once you pretty much hit like the age of 7, you were capable of going and working like an adult. And so it's very interesting to me that Freud would think that the time when our hormones are most active was the time that we are the least sexual, and I would totally disagree with that. I'm like, from about pre-puberty to, you know, 20s, we're very sexual creatures, and once again it's because we're controlled by hormones at these stages of development so much. So I find that interesting. He was like, yeah, no, don't have time for that. Like, that's the time we do have for all of that. So interesting there. So all right, so then we get to the last stage of development for Freud, and that is the genital stage, and this is puberty to adolescence. So this is when he really starts to get into this kind of adolescent sexual experimentation, which once again I think is funny. He's like, no, this didn't start until I mean, I can't think of specific ages here, but I mean, he's got a real short time period for that. And then it's like, you know, you become an adult and you have your one-on-one relationship, and then you're an adult and you pretty much live as an adult, and you stop having sex with your mate because you get back to that familiar love, kind of like you had with your parents and your family, and then we get old and die. I'm pretty optimistic view, right, guys? And so basically with Freud, like I said, he felt that in the genital stage, that libido, it was all about heterosexual pleasure, and you know, like I said, we know that that's just not quite true now. Alright, so like I said, you know, Freud, very controversial, you know, very audacious to, you know, say there, I've got my times wrong there, it should be early 1900s to late to the middle 1900s, so excuse that infraction there. And you know, we see these ideas that he had that where people were just like, oh my gosh. And then like I said, some of the fact that he doesn't talk a lot about women, and kind of the way he does talk about women there with that penis envy, that can be very what's the word? I guess offensive is the word that I'm trying to say there, and you know, and it's just offensive in itself. And then, you know, basically just that idea that anything that we had bothering us, be it, you know, just in our life or in our personalities, in our behaviors, that it was all sexual in nature. That was really where the Neo-Freudians started to split from Freud. They were like, no, it's not all about these traumatic events in childhood. You know, sometimes it's something else, and we should be looking towards that something else too there. Libido, that's something else that he's critiqued on, because, you know, once again, all of these ideas Freud came up with, they're just concepts, so there's not something that can be measured and tested. And when we do, in research that has been done on this, we see that it kind of discredits and contradicts some of Freud's ideas here. And basically, though, when it comes to Freud, we have to remember that, you know, he wasn't working with children specifically. So to talk about childhood development, it's, you know, actual observation of children doing things is the best way to figure you know, out behaviors at those stages. He was basically working with adult patients who were, you know, recollecting memories of being children. So that's why, you know, his theories are more based on individual case studies, and they're not really empirical research, so we don't have a lot of hard evidence for it. But that doesn't mean that it's not appropriate in some situations, you know, because Freud did work with people that exhibited some of these behaviorisms that he is talking about. We do know that it is applicable in certain situations, and so it's good that we have his ideas that, you know, that he came up with. And they're also good because, as you guys have seen and will see, everybody else has kind of build up their ideas of development kind of based on Freud. So, you know, even though we you know, laugh at him a lot because of his ideas of sex and you want to sleep with your mother, Freud really was a brilliant man, and he gave us a lot of brilliant ideas when it comes to just, you know, how our minds and behaviors work. And like I said, you know, if he didn't have so many great ideas, we wouldn't still be talking about him. So basically, we have Carl Jung now. And so Carl Jung was a friend and student of Freud's. He was at the first APA conference when they first organized that. It was like, so most of the biggest psychologists were at that meeting there. I used to have a picture of it. I can't find that picture though. But, so Jung, you know, like I said, friend, student of Freud's, he started kind of, you know, differing along those ideas of, you know, everything always being kind of libido related, sexual related. He did agree with Freud about, you know, us having the conscious mind, the unconscious mind, the subconscious mind. He agreed, you know, with this idea that our psyche was made up of these different parts. But he also had some other ideas too, because for Carl Jung, and we start to see kind of more of the outside world starting to come into play in our development there. So Carl Jung believed in this idea of what he called the collective unconscious. Now in sociology, we have an idea by Emil Durkheim called the collective consciousness. And basically the collective consciousness is it's kind of like, think of it as like traditions or kind of like heritage. It's kind of like this general awareness of things to do that we all agree on as members of a culture, whether we agree with it or not, you know, or whether we believe in it or not would be a better way to say. So think of something like Christmas, think of something like Easter, think of something like Halloween. Maybe you don't necessarily subscribe to those holidays or traditions, but you know that it's Christmas time, and everybody in your family says, no, we don't like Christmas, don't give us any gifts. But then what ends up happening? Christmas morning, everybody gets together and there's gifts, and and you're like, oh God, everybody's gonna have gifts. I can't be the one left out without having gifts. So what does everybody do? Even though nobody wants gift, nobody really wants to participate because of that collective consciousness, because it's kind of wired, programmed into us, that tradition, we tend to do it anyway, all right? So basically, the collective unconscious is very similar to that. So it's this consciousness that exists out in nature. It's universal. If you remember our consciousness lecture there, consciousness is kind of this fundamental, universal, kind of systematic aspect of life. So it's something that exists all around us, and it's something that we're not consciously aware of. That's why it's called the collective unconscious, because it's down in the unconscious part of our mind. So it's there, we just don't always call it to our conscious mind, but we can tap into that. We tap into that universal unconsciousness, that consciousness that exists out in nature. And we really see this in things things like symbols, things art, poetry, music, language, anything that has to do with creativity, anything that affects our behavior, elicits those emotional responses. Those are part of this collective unconsciousness. And we really see that with things like our personalities and things like archetypes there. So Carl Jung believed and that outer nature reflected our inner nature. So basically, he was a big component of, or a big proponent, I should say. He was really big into going out in nature, healing in nature. That the way that, we really get into our minds, we really get down into the unconscious and bring up, what our brains are trying to sell us, is by being out alone, quiet, and nature. And so he said our experience out in nature, that's kind of what helps us, what helps us to heal, what gives us that reflection of what's really going on with us. So like if you encountered a wolf, then how that encounter went would probably be symbolic or representative of, say, whatever was troubling you in your life. Here's another good example, something like contact with nature spirits or with the fairies. Carl Jung would say, it doesn't matter if that's something that's a being from another realm or if it's something you've made up in your own head. In fact, Carl Jung would be like, it doesn't matter what it is something that your mind made up, because it's something that your mind's trying to tell you. It's something that just nature in general is trying to tell you, just the energy of life, because we're alive to experience it and to have happiness and to good life, and just to learn and grow, guys. Life is not about bad, ugly things, and that's kind of those societal conflicts, things that come in here. So for Carl Jung, he believed that those nature experiences, those are what would help us to heal. Those are what told us about ourselves. And a lot of the times we see a lot of experiences, a lot of characteristics of personality are very universal, because no matter what culture you go to, you see them. They may be expressed in different ways, but they're still there. The most common archetype maybe you guys have heard of, it's called the hero's journey, or the hero archetype, the hero myth. The hero being, just kind of that normal person that something happens in life and he or she is now called upon to go out and do this kind of grand act, this kind of grand deed. And, that's mythology that, like I said, we see across many cultures, and we see, since kind of the first humans, we see in prehistory. And basically, that hero is a representation of identity, of personality, a certain way of how to be human. Okay, so And Carl Jung believed that our psyches, the personality part of our minds, that we all had 4 major parts or archetypes, and then there are also 12 common archetypes that we see cross-culturally. But really, the numbers are, they're kind of infinite because, you know, these are, I'll show you the 12 most common archetypes. But they can tend to overlap. We can have more than one archetype at a time in our lives. And, you know, when we can identify which archetype we are at in our life, that's how we get closer to self-actualization, which is, you know, becoming the bestest version of ourselves that we can possible, because that in turn makes us better communicators, listeners, critical thinkers, and agents of social change there. Alright, so basically for Jung, archetypes are kind of these primordial images. And there's kind of these, they're primordial, they're kind of innate kind of tendencies, characteristics that shape our human behavior. So they're kind of the ways that we go about behaving, right? Archetypes, they're those characteristics, those tendencies that make up that behavior, and you can look at them as kind of, they're the roles that we take on, or the different hats that we wear depending on what situation we're in. So like right now in class, if you're listening to this lecture, I am in the teacher archetype, you're in the student archetype, and so because of that, we know that there are certain tendencies that we must display in order for both of those roles to play out, and in order for society to function as it should, right? And so some of these archetypes are kind of are common and a little mundane, I would say, but then at the same time, Carl Jung called them numinous, and their numinous is because a lot of these archetypes, they are able to evoke very deep and intense emotional responses from us. Think about it like mother archetype, father archetype, you know, we have those familiar love and you know, ideas of our caregivers associated with that. You have the lover archetype, which would be your mate, your partner in life, and you know, so we see emotional connotations with that too. Remember, being human, it's about how our thoughts influence our behaviors, our actions, but it's really a triad, remember guys, because we have those emotional responses too, so we have to throw that into the equation. And just some more ways to think about archetypes here. And you know, archetypes, they're those ways that we think we should behave in the situation. And you know, once again, because these are kind of universal, they've existence since the beginning of humanity, we kind of have those guides throughout cultures. We have those myths to tell us what those tendencies are, to tell us how we should behave. And, you know, that then is what helps us to function, to get along with others. All right. So now, when it comes to this idea of archetypes and looking at our psyche, just like Freud, you know, Carl Jung broke the psyche up into 3 parts, but he kind of changes them around from Freud. So we thought we have our ego, our personal unconscious, and the collective unconscious. So ego, once again, that's the conscious awareness. So just like Freud, our ego is the one that lives in the here and now. The one that is always in reality, dealing with everything around us, right? And then the personal unconscious, that would just be our unconscious overall. That's where we had those memories, all our life experiences, even the things that are suppressed are in there. Along with that, then we have that collective unconscious, and this is the unique thing that Jung contributed, you know, because he saw these universal symbols and signs across all these different cultures. He believed that you know, that was some kind of like we are kind of energetically, I hate to say the word, but I'm going to use it, guys, psychically kind of connected at some root core of being human. You know, just by the fact that we are human, we somehow collectively share, you know, these energies, these tendencies, these characteristics. I'm not quite sure what word you want to give it to it, but you know, it's just collective unconscious, I guess is the best way to say it, just like Jung said there, right? And it's kind of like we all have these tendencies and characteristics inside of us. They're inside of our DNA. We inherit them from our ancestors, and it's all the knowledge and experiences that we share as a species. It's kind of interesting too. There's this idea called the acoustic records, or the acoustic plane. I don't know if I've told you guys this before, but basically it's supposed to be this plane of existence where like all the knowledge of everything that ever has been, ever will be, whatever, is there in the acoustic planes. And so Carl Jung, he did a lot of meditation and like guided visualizations, and like I said, just spent a lot of time out in nature. So he talks about, he even had this really intricate dream world. I mean, he could set up, he had his own little place that he would go in his mind when he would dream. And a lot of people note that you go to that Akashic plane, Akashic field, when you dream. And it's interesting because people like Einstein, people like Bill Gates, Stephen Hawking, Tesla, you know, they have all noted some kind of experience of being on the acoustic plane. And they have also noted that most of their best ideas have come to them in a dream. So it's always interesting to think about there. So when it comes to our psyche, these four main parts, or four main archetypes that Jung thought composed it, are the self, the shadow, the anime / animus. It shouldn't be R, it's both there. Anime, animus, and the persona. Alright, so basically I would say that the self is the one that is in charge of all of the parts there. That's the unification. That's where, you know, that unconscious and consciousness come together, and that's where we see then that integration of all those different characteristics of our personality. Jung was really big into Eastern philosophy too, so a lot of ideas he got from such philosophies. He was really big into the I Ching, and he liked things like mandala, so he would usually draw that to represent the self. Alright, our shadow side is pretty much the part of the unconscious mind that it's our dark side. It's the part of our psyche that has all our negativity, and just not even, you know, just negative kind of things that we want to suppress and not think about. It's also that unknown, that wildness, that chaos. And once again, you know, think about nature. Going out in nature, it's very wild, it's very chaotic, it's very unknown, untamed, and you know, in many ways Jung said that we all have a part of that inside of ourselves, and that's our shadows. A lot of times our shadow is kind of more composed of those negative things, and so in order to heal and be a healthy adult and individual, you know, we do have to embrace and acknowledge our shadow side too. And a lot of times we deny that shadow part of ourselves, right? And a lot of times then we project it onto others. And so once again, because this is something that exists through all cultures, through all humans across time, what we see is then that shadow gets represented as it gets symbolism associated with us. So a lot of times our shadow side will appear to us in dreams or visions. So once again, you know, if something is bothering us, our mind's got to give us that really profound, shocking, hey, pay attention type experience, right? And so we often see the shadow depicted as, you know, something that scares us, something that is, you know, represents that chaos, that unknown, those more darker dimensions of life. So a lot of time we see snakes, monsters, demons, dragons. Alright, so the anime and the animus, this is pretty much the balance of the female and male aspects that we all have. You know, we like to say that because anatomically we're either male or female for the most part. You know, we say then that our characteristics and personality are only male and only female. And we see how throughout history that has led to gender stereotypes, gender segregation and things of that nature, gender suppression, and things of that nature. Sorry to repeat myself there. But basically, we're all composed of male and female characteristics. And in order to have that true self, to be a healthy, functioning adult, we had to have those parts of ourselves in conjunction, in union, which is what Jung called the synergy, I think is how you say it. Synergy. And basically it's just that. It's that unification of the male and the female. We can throw Eastern philosophy in again, so think about the yin and yang, you know, that if you got that kind of like circle with the dark side and a white side, right? So that's the anime and animus. That represents the male and female aspects of our personalities, and it's, you know, represented the way it does is because it's about balancing those out. And if you ever look at one of those yin yang, you'll notice that one side, the sides are not just all male and not just all female, that there's always going to be a little white dot in the middle of the black side and always going to be a little black dot in the middle of the white side to represent the fact that we're not just one. We are made up of both of them. And you know, and it's about getting both of them into unification there. That's what I was looking for. Alright, so basically persona is the mask. This is the self that we present to the world, and it's not about being fake. It's not that, you know, putting on that fake mask, even though, of course, you know, some people do that. But persona, it's the role that we assume in life, right? It goes back to the actual manifestation of these archetypes. The persona is the one that knows which role we need to be in. It's like I said, it's that mask or that hat we put in depending on the situation that we're in. And sometimes our persona, it can shield us from kind of negative things that happen in life, and you know, once again, it's something that would appear to us in dreams, depending on you know, what was going on in our life there. So, you know, persona is the Greek Latin word for mask there. But like I said, you know, it's not, even though some people do that, it's not really about, you know, we put on these fake faces when we go out into society. It's more about, you know, putting on the making sure that we have the appropriate behavior. Think about it. If you go to your favorite sports game, and you're cheering for your favorite basketball team, you have a different persona in that environment than, say, you do when you go to church, or you go to a place of worship, or like you go to a library, if anybody goes to libraries anymore, where you have to be quiet, you know, but or you don't act the same as you do in those places as when you go to the bar, or say as when, you know, you're hanging out with your friends on the beach. I mean, think about when you go to Walmart, you don't act like you do at a sporting event. When you go to a restaurant, you know, those different ways that we have to behave in different social situations, you know, that's all representative of our personas. Alright, so like we said, when it comes to these archetypes, we have 12 common ones, because these are the ones that we see represented throughout history and across cultures. And he says that, you know, they're not really fixed, and you know, they're not static, they're not fixed, which means that they can evolve. Just like we as humans evolve, so can our psyches and our personas and our personalities. It's all the same thing there. I just said it 3 different ways to show you guys, because that's what psyche means. Psyche means personality. So when we talk about our psyches, we're talking about the part of our mind that deals with our personalities, right? Like we said, and sometimes they can overlap, sometimes they can be combined, and then in some incidences they may just have different meanings. It just depends on the situation. But for the most part, father, mother, child, some wise old man, or a wise old woman, that would have been more appropriate the further back in kind of about 1400s, we would probably, or maybe even, maybe about 1500s, it was usually wise old women that people would go to for a wisdom. Still, in many cultures, that's still the way. But anyway, I digress. We have the hero, the maiden, the trickster, the warrior, the destroyer. Those are some other common ones. There we go. Orphan, seeker, magician, the fool. The fool is the fool, the trickster, the hero that we've talked about. Those are usually ones that we see throughout many cultures. We have the innocent, the orphan, the seeker, the fool here. In many ways, in some cultures, we could break those all down, and we don't break them all down. We combine them all in, and we call them the fool. And the fool is not a fool as in someone who is stupid. It's more a fool as in someone who is just not experienced, and it's that naivety. It's that the willingness and the potential and possibility that life has to offer. The fool is the one that's ready to run out and engage as much as possible. And so we say, foolish to always be jumping into situations, but it's really about experience and about how we all have to be the fool before we can learn to be like the sage, or learn to be the ruler, or learn to be the lover, because you have to go out and have those experiences, and you have to let life kind of deceive you at times, because that is how you ultimately learn and grow. Alright, so that wraps us up with Jung, and what I want to do here for these last couple of slides is talk about a fairly new psychologist. He's one of my favorite eco-psychologists that I've read a lot. His name's Bill Plotkin. His favorite book of mine is Nature and the Human Soul. And so pretty much based on these ideas of Jung, these ideas of these universal symbols, archetypes, we heal in nature. We have gotten to a field of psychology now that we call transpersonal psychology, and more specifically eco-psychology. Eco-psychology is about that human nature connection. It's about acknowledging the role that the natural world has on our health, wealth, and development. So when it comes to our American culture, many modern psychologists say that we live in a very consumeristic society, and in many ways we are suffering mass psychosis because we're dominated by adolescent habits and desires. So those needs to always buy stuff, always being on computer, cell phone, telephone type things, playing around, that's all very adolescent and doesn't represent a mature culture. We're very fast-paced, we're disposable, we're wasteful, we don't care about each other, the earth, the environment, other species, and in doing all of that, what we're really doing is we're hurting ourselves, we're hurting our overall development, because we're not engaging in authentic adulthood. We haven't developed and matured enough to be able to do that. And so Plotkin and other eco-psychologists, they say that we should go from this egocentric to an eco-centric society, and just kind of way of thinking. So that egocentric, it's all very competitive, it's very consumeristic, capitalistic, and it's all about me, mine, right? We're not really thinking about the group as a whole. We're not thinking about sustainable ways to be human, because when we can be more sustainable, it makes us more cooperative, makes us more compassionate, and then once again, it helps us experience authentic living, authentic just personhood. We don't even have to say authentic adulthood, just authentic personhood there. And so what Plotkin has done is he's come along and he's kind of taken Freud and he's taken these ideas of Jung and he's taken Erikson's stages of development and he's changed them around, and he kind of has his own proposed stages of development that we go through based on this idea of this ecocentric. So, you know, development that includes, you know, the natural environment. It's a holistic approach to development and being human. You know, we're not just looking at ourselves, the individual, like Freud did. We're not just looking at the individual in the social context, like Erikson and Vygotsky. Piaget was a little more in the individual, but Vygotsky, Outerman, I mean, you name it, pretty much all the other developmentists there and some of their ideas. It's all about the individual in relation to society. So now we're just opening that up and making it more holistic. We're like, okay, we have individual development in relation to society. Now we need all of that. Now we need to include nature into that too, you know, because that is a part of the world we live in. You know, our natural environments do make up a big part of what it means to be human and how we are human there. So Plotkin has come up with 8 archetypes here. Hopefully you've had time to read each the 8 of those. And you see, they're very similar to those common archetypes we see that Jung noted. But what we see with Plotkin is he puts this twist of that nature twist. So, you know, each stage of development is in relation to some aspect of a natural environment, or some aspect of nature, I guess we should say here. And so just like with Erikson and like with Freud, with each stage of development we have some kind of conflict that we have to overcome. But rather than using the word conflict, because that has a lot of negative connotation to it, Plotkin uses the word task. We have tasks that we must accomplish, and then when we accomplish those tasks, then we find our gifts to society. Because as human beings, we're all unique individuals with some kind of special gift to give to society. That's where the humanists come along and are a little bit different from the rest of psychologists. You know, with everybody else, we're kind of looking more at these abnormal behaviors. We're not looking at the positive potential of what it means to be human. And so humanists kind of come in and they start looking at that, and so we could see, you know, how they're influential in Plotkin's ideas to here too. So whereas Freud had the idea of libido, for Plotkin what he says is that at each stage of development, just our energy, just our life energy, not sexual energy, but life energy, is some sort of center of gravity. Okay, so as human beings, we are bipedal. So being bipedal means that the majority of our weight and the majority of our stress we carry in our hips, right? Because our hips are our center of gravity. They're what keep us up and keep us moving. So to throw in some Eastern philosophy again, we have these ideas called chakras. Maybe you guys, or maybe some people call them chakras. I kind of like chakras better. That's how I've grown up saying them, and it's easier for me to say that. I pronounce a lot of things wrong, though, if you guys haven't noticed. But we have this ideas of chakras, and basically chakras are just these energy points that we have in our body. And when those energy points are open, then you know, we're open. Let me think how to say this. We are open to all the experiences in life. We're not stuck in those negative experiences. You know, we're just kind of open, and we are really in kind of that actualized mode that Maslow talks about, because we're able to be calm, we're open, we're mindful of what's going on around us, and that helps us, you know, that increases our critical skills so we can solve problems better and we can find more positive and productive things to do. Because really that's the thing, I would say, the biggest well, no, I'm not going to say that. I would say a biggest thing that I was going to say that defines us from other animals, but I won't say that. But a big thing that defines us as just being human beings and why we have evolved and survived for as long as we have is because we are problem-solving creatures, right? We are presented with a task and we can figure it out eventually, okay? So we can figure that out better when we are in these states of mindfulness, when we're relaxed, when we're calm, when we're open, you know. And that really changes the way we see ourselves when we see others in the world around us, all right? So basically for Plotkin, these center of gravities are just like those chakras, you know. For each one, you kind of, you know, each task accomplished at that stage, you know, you light up that center of gravity, you get that gift, and then you're able to move on and, you know, present that gift back to society. It's like, you know, be that productive member of society. And what I like about Plotkin too is that, of course, yes, you know, some kind of dysfunction can occur if you don't move move up to the next stage. But for Plotkin, you could go back. If you haven't gone through a stage and it's holding you back in life, it's okay to go back and work on that former stage. The thing with Plotkin, though, is you can't move forward. So if you're only like in early adulthood, you're the apprentice at the wellspring, you can't move up and become the sage in the mountain cave. It's just not going to happen because you haven't had that life experience to make that happen. Pretty much like with Erickson too. You know, with Erickson, in many ways, you can work on those past stages, but you can't go forward. If you're in integrity and despair, you just can't jump ahead to generativity and stagnation and put yourself there. You know, you have to work on whatever that task, that conflict is at that particular stage. And then, like I said, you can always move back. So when you move back, you know, that then is what helps you to just become a healthy, functioning individual, positive and productive member of society. All right. So since archetypes are pretty much just characteristics of our personalities, what I have done is I have included, well, in my class, I always we do this in class. We do a guided visualization, and what I will do is I will put it in the announcements in class for you guys to try if you would like to do that. But basically, guided visualizations, they're meditations, they're mindfulness practices, but they're a little bit different because with guided visualizations, we're really using our imaginations. It's a way for us to, like I have said here, it's a way to set a theme, imagine ourselves in different ways, and tap into that universal collective unconsciousness that Jung talks about. And then in many ways, it's about finding parts of ourselves that we weren't aware of, or maybe coming to relearn parts of ourselves. So with the one that we do in class, some of it does have to, it's about healing. It's a guided visualization into fairyland where you go and talk to the healing fairies. And so some of it is about working with your shadow side and about learning to embrace that shadow side and learning how to find the positive in that shadow side too. So with guided visualizations, we really have to allow ourselves to be a lot more open-minded than we are, say, with things like mindfulness practices, because like I said, it really does require you allowing to let yourself go and just let your imagination kind of take over and see where it goes from there. And then you always have to remember, this is something that you are doing in your mind. You always have control over the situation. And in saying that, these guided visualizations or any mindfulness practices I would give you in class, they are not professional therapy. We do these just for fun. And then in many ways too, if you do feel like you would like to go into the field of psychology, you know, mindfulness practices are used in therapy, but you can't do anything like that until you get your PhD, you get your hours in, and you are actually licensed to practice. Can you start offering that as therapy? And you do that in conjunction with other stuff. But my point is that, you know, even as teachers, as psychologists, when we go to share things with our students, with clients, you know, most of the time we've tried it on ourselves. You don't know how effective something is going to be. You don't know how to be able to tell somebody else, you know, how they can work on healing their selves if you haven't experienced it first. That's really a big thing with psychology too. If you haven't experienced it, it's really hard to go out and to tell other people how to deal with this. That's why group therapy seems to be one of the you know, most successful ways of getting people help with their addictions, or you know, with changing some abnormal behaviors there. And so, you know, art, and once again, our imagination, it's a great way that we express those archetypes. It's a great way for that, you know, those collective unconsciousness to kind of tap into us too. It's not just us tapping into it, it taps into us. I think a lot of artwork is probably appropriate, however you say that, appropriate to say that. And so, when I'm in class, I have these specific set of fairy cards that I hand out to students because they have a lot of symbolism in them. They're the people who make the cards. They know about all this psychology stuff. They know about anthropology. You know, they spend a lot of time out in nature. So you know, a lot of symbolism, a lot of different just universal things present in those cards. If you'd like to try the guided visualization and you would like one of those cards, just send me an email and I'll take the I'll just throw them on the ground, pick up one for you, and send it to you. And then what I tell my students in class is that they can think of that as their fairy guide as they go through their healing journey there into fairyland. So, all right, guys, that is the end of part 1 on personality. And like I said, part 2 will be the humanist, and we'll talk all about self-actualization. Thanks, guys.